sobs of the violins of autumn wound my heart with a monotonous language.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, the show where we speak with those on the front lines of it.
Thank you for inviting me to be with you today, Theo. It's a pleasure to be here and to see you again.
Yes, it's wonderful.
I always think that where you met somebody can really be a beacon in your friendship. And we met in a rather seedy basement bar in Kyiv with a lot of other miscreants. And it was an evening to remember.
Yes, it's a real den of scum and villainy, that bar, and I absolutely love it.
Exactly. Me too. What do I do in Ukraine? So I think principally I have, over the last 3 years, put together quite an amazing address book of extraordinary people, Ukrainians mostly, and other volunteers and organizations and people I've worked with. And I would say the greatest value I can offer to those who want to help and support Ukraine is by connecting these people. On a practical level, I have worked throughout with Mission Ukraine UK, helping them bring out second-hand 4x4s to be converted into medevac vehicles, and then delivering them to frontline medics. Mission Ukraine is an amazing organization. It's entirely volunteer run, and it has extraordinary contacts within the Ukrainian military, principally with the medical side. And through them, we are also able to be very well informed about what's happening. And I also work with Mobile Medical Rescue, which is an organization that supports brigades on the front line all over Ukraine, and helps plug some of the gaps if they don't have as many medics or as much support as they need in stabilization units. And it usually has at any one time around 5 teams of medics operating. So I am a medevac driver for their teams, and I've done 3-4 rotations with them, and also work with them doing anything else that they need help with.
When did you decide to go?
It's like a lot of good things in life, it happened by chance. So back in 22, family member was raising money for generators for recently liberated villages. And I volunteered to drive out the van load of them. And in those days, it was, well, I don't know if you were there then, but those were quite difficult, dark days. Those villages had only been liberated for a month. They were between Mykolaiv and Kherson on the beyond Snihurivka. And these were people who had no electricity, sometimes no water, no communication. The villagers didn't know if their families were still alive. They weren't able to communicate with them. And we took them a generator to help them charge their phones, to help them just with a tiny bit of electricity so they could communicate with the outside world. And once you've met those people and they've hugged you and they've sobbed on your shoulder and told you that your support means a lot, Firstly, obviously, you feel completely inadequate. What have you done? Done very little. And then secondly, you think, I can't walk away now. And from that, I've got more and more involved.
And you say you volunteer as a medic and ambulance driver. Did you have any medical training before you came out?
Absolutely none at all. I mean, apart from St. John's Ambulance, that kind of thing. But obviously, I'd been on expeditions before, and we'd had to have some medical training in case things went wrong out in the Bundu. But no proper stuff. So since then, I've done 3 TCCC courses, and I've done 2 courses with an organisation called ATTAC, ATACC, who are an extraordinary organisation. And I would say that they principally are the ones that have prepared me for catastrophic hemorrhages on the front line and other awful injuries.
And for those not in the know, what is a TCCC course?
TCCC is Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Wow, can't believe I finally managed to remember that acronym. Yeah, that's it. So it deals with extreme trauma at the point of injury.
So what would you describe your role with MMR as? Ambulance driver and stabilization boy?
I would say that when I first arrived, I thought I was the lowest of the low, the person what drove, not the person that saved lives. But it was pointed out to me that without an effective driver, nobody's going to get the help they need. So actually, you are quite important. My primary responsibility is to get the casualties and the medics to a place of safety as safely and quickly as possible.
And how do you...
Quite complex.
I can imagine. Had you had any experience of war before driving out to Ukraine?
Well, many, many years ago. So I'd been in Zimbabwe during the war there. 2 of my brothers were war correspondents. And I was in Cambodia very shortly after the peace. So, and the other thing is, I was brought up in a household where people that had operated behind the lines during World War II were frequent visitors, and their normality had not been the normal civilian normality. So their conversation, I would say, it sort of created something where none of that seemed particularly extraordinary. I mean, what they did was extraordinary, but what I mean is that situations of stress and challenge and danger were not a concept that were foreign to me.
The war in Ukraine is, the largest shooting war in Europe, especially since the end of World War II. I remember when I sort of first went out, experienced my first air raid, the first Salah Shaheeds and the air defense. I felt that it was almost surreal.
Yeah.
How did that experience strike you the first time when you realized the actual scale of this thing?
I suppose in 22, there was still a lot of the gung-ho attitude. And there were a lot of volunteers who kind of measured you by your reaction to danger. And that is an attitude that's no longer fit for purpose. And there are people still coming out to Ukraine who think that courting danger or taking that devil-may-care attitude is smart and praiseworthy. And actually, all it does is put their lives in danger and the lives of Ukrainians in danger, who will then have to look after them.
And I've certainly found that. And I've seen over the time, the brief couple of times I've been to Ukraine, the attitude certainly shift from a bit of a shrug when you hear a shaheed to, okay, well, it's time to remember the walls rule and consider where I'm going to be. What's a typical day look like for you when you're working as an ambulance driver?
So day and night don't have any meaning anymore. I need to be prepared at all times to just pick up my kit and put on my gear and be ready to get the ambulance to the door, be ready, have all the batteries for the EW charged up, have everything ready, and then go in and see if we need a stretcher, if this is a lying down, a sitting down, how many, how we're going to put them, where we're going to put them, which medics are coming, just one, or will there be two medics coming with us? And then sometimes we get delays, in which case I have to consider putting the ambulance in a place of safety while we're waiting, because it can't be in the open for too long. Things have really, really changed. I used to work at the point of injury or point of evacuation. That no longer happens. It's too dangerous. The drones, the grey zone and the death zone are real. We were based within that grey zone and we lived underground. And you live in the same places that the casualties are being treated. And we have an app on which we can receive warnings of when FPVs, grads, Molniers, cabs are incoming.
And FPVs, grads, Molniers, cabs, those are different sorts of munitions for the audience.
They are. And one of the things I learnt to do was distinguish what sound meant which thing incoming, which was handy.
That reminds me of an exhibition I saw before I went to Ukraine, and it was by a Polish artist who spoke to Ukrainian refugees and had them imitate the noise that various different munitions made. And that was very powerful. If anybody listening can look it up, I highly recommend it. And I will try to find out what it is and put it in the notes. Hello, audience. This is Editing Theo. I've looked it up. It is Repeat After Me 2 by the Art Collective Open Group, and there shall be a link in the show notes for you to be able to look it up. But you described two words. I'm familiar with them, but the audience may not be. Well, two phrases, the grey zone and the death zone.
Yeah.
What are these?
They are the zones where it's basically the what do you call it? The distance that a drone can operate. And that's been gradually increasing. And as the enemy has started using relays, mother drones, all of that, the range has increased and increased. So in the past, artillery was quite scary and went quite a long way. Drones were had a shorter range, but now they have a really long range, or potentially a long range. And also you have the problem with fiber optic drones, which operate on a long thread, a bit like very old people will remember this. There was a thing called a cassette tape, and it had a kind of tape that the music was on. Well, fiber optics have a kind of thread a bit like that. Which,
looks like a fishing line.
Yeah, and that means that they don't use radio frequencies, therefore you can't block them. So me and the casualties and the medic are protected, well, in my case, by EW, by
EW being
electronic warfare. It's we had a drone jammer, so it jams specific frequencies. And for the purposes of the person at risk, all drones are enemy drones, regardless of whether there's no distinguishing whether it's us or the enemy. You have to assume that a drone is the enemy, because by the time you find out, you're dead. So, yeah. And I was very lucky. I have a friend in the military out there who lent me a drone detector. So his instructions were, it was the first time I'd operated a drone detector. I have to admit it took me a while to get the hang of it. But the most important instruction he gave me was, at the last minute on your drone detector screen, you see a picture of the roof. If you see a picture of the roof of your vehicle on the drone detector, just run. Don't stop. Scream at the people in the back. Tell them to evacuate. Stop as quickly as you can and run, because it's too late. You know, driving faster is not going to work at that point. That means that you are seeing what the drone is seeing. If it's seeing the roof of your vehicle, you really are in the last chance saloon.
And would an ambulance be targeted?
Yes. Ambulances and medics are primary targets, because by killing them, you are ensuring that lives aren't saved and there will be fewer combatants. And the people that can save lives, it's a multiple, isn't it? You kill the medics, that means fewer people will survive.
So traditionally, when people imagine an ambulance in a military setting, they're imagining it's got a red cross or a red crescent on it. Can that still be done?
No, and hasn't been able to be done. I think some voluntary organisations, when they're fundraising, they will show pictures of the vehicle that their donors have amazingly fundraised for with a red cross on. But before they go to the front line, the red crosses must be removed.
So they're stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place, because under the rules of war, if you have a red cross, then you're marking yourself as a non-combatant and shouldn't be targeted. But what you're saying is that would make you more of a target. Is that correct?
Much more of a target. When I say a primary target, doubly. I mean, we're talking about people. We were in a military stab point, but we did treat a few civilians because there was no alternative. They came from places right on the front line.
Yeah.
And there was one casualty we had in, an older lady. She'd been drone hunted by 4 drones, and she'd managed to evade the first 2. But the 3rd and 4th got her, and her legs were a mess.
Did she survive?
Yes, and talked throughout. She was quite a tough person.
Wow.
Yeah.
She was a civilian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Civilians are as much, I mean, we're talking about an enemy that chooses as primary targets schools, hospitals, children's hospitals. You remember Okhmadut?
I remember.
Schools, hospitals, medics, first responders. First responders now have to wear full combat gear because of the double tap, where the enemy bombs or sends a missile in, waits a short time until they're sure first responders will arrive to rescue people, and then sends in another one to kill the first responders.
So what you're saying is that you're a witness to war crimes.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that there is, in the outside world, people can't believe it. You know, when I post things on Instagram, people go, "Oh, this is terrible. I had no idea," and all of this. And you think, how many times do we have to repeat this?
And the same thing, I mean, the same thing occurs with press. Press should wear press badges, should avoid wearing military-esque colours, olive green, etc. blue is the traditional color.
Mm.
But now, if you go to the front lines, or even if you go to the gray zone, with anything that says press written on it, then you can expect to be targeted.
You're a primary target too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it goes as far, I've listened to drone pilots talking. Anything that makes you look different, an item of clothing, anything that is not the same as the people around you makes you a primary target.
And these two zones, the death zone and the gray zone, from your recent experience, about how big are they from the actual zero line, what people imagine as the front line, the trenches or the foxholes at the front?
Well, in theory, it's 10 to 15, isn't it, on either side of the notional front line? But it's more. So, for instance, you know, Kramatorsk, there's been FPVs in Kramatorsk. The road from Izium to Slavyansk, which used to be safe in inverted commas. Not anymore. Very close friend had a very lucky escape 10 days ago. An FPV bounced off her vehicle. 2 more people on that road were targeted by FPVs. The range has increased. I'm not saying that it's constant, but what it is it's no longer like it was. And also because of the incursion to the east of Dobropilia, you know, the roads are different, the access roads, and they're not really that safe. So it's drone tunnels everywhere, which give you maybe a false sense of security.
What is a drone tunnel?
So imagine like telegraph poles, but very close together, not as high, probably 2/3 as high, on both sides of the road. And they stretch fishing nets over them from ground over the top and to the other side. And this is meant to protect you from FPVs. It sort of does, but the enemy can use more than one drone to make a hole and then go in for you, or it can wait and ambush you at the beginning and end of the tunnel. So where I was working, they were still putting up the drone tunnels while I was there. But obviously checkpoints had this protection over them. So you have to slow down for a checkpoint.
Yeah.
Theory. You know, and I always used to have a bit of a trepidatious moment as I approached the netting over the checkpoint and at the exit.
Yeah.
I used to come out of the checkpoints like a bat out of hell. Actually, I'll tell you a really funny story.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so one of the bridges was down. So I had to take a more circuitous route when evacuating casualties on one particular day. And it was a longer route and closer to the front line. I always drove quite fast anyway, probably faster than the locals. So I'm evacuating a green casualty. So he's seated, he's not too serious. And he's peering through the hatchway into the driver's cab. And he says, "Could you please slow down? I want to arrive alive." And I said, "Well, if you want to arrive alive, we will continue to drive this fast."
It's funny you say arrive alive, because that is the motto of police blue light driving training school.
Maybe I should go off and do one of those courses.
Oh, they are. I've not had the opportunity, but IRV driving courses are very fun. And I think, I don't know if they're offered privately. You could probably get away with one.
Probably.
There's a very good video from the 90s called The Liver Run, and it's a chap doing a full IRV run throughout London to deliver, a liver.
Yeah.
And he's doing the commentary that you have to do to pass the test. And
Right.
it's fascinating because you have to think of everything. And why? I mean, we touched on this before.
Mm.
You're putting yourself at enormous personal risk. Why keep going back? Because there were loads of volunteers that went out in 22 and did a tour and then didn't return.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have commitments and family commitments
Of
and
course.
job commitments, and it's amazing that they give up probably their holiday to come and do this. So hats off to them, and absolutely no judgment at all. My situation is different, which enables me to be out there, although my family do have concerns. But I think the short answer to what you're saying is, when I die and I look back, I don't want to say I could have. I want to say I did. I did do it.
And how has this experience changed your view of the conflict and your view of the world? You see the most raw human consequences of this war every day that you're working.
Well, strangely, it's probably increased my realization of the essential goodness of humanity in times of stress and trouble, and of the importance of morality and the importance of fighting for your principles.
Does any moment come to mind which defines that for you?
There are so many, aren't there? I don't have a story off pat. I think it's the casualties who come in, and one of the questions they always ask is, how soon can I get back here to continue fighting and supporting my brothers?
And how do you cope with the pressure, the danger? Because everybody has different ways. Whenever I'm getting close to the front line, I tend to insist on buying a few cigarettes.
Totally. I think I must be the only person who doesn't smoke on the front line in
Yeah.
Ukraine. A Snickers bar is probably my go-to in those times. How do I cope? Well, I think the answer is that I've talked to a lot of people, and as I'm sure you have, is it's not so much an accumulation, although that does have an effect. It's usually one or two specific incidents that happen and come back to you, and those are potentially your breaking point. You know, a certain incident or a certain number of incidents. And obviously, there have been a few of those for me. And I suppose not this time, but the time before I came back, and I definitely had, you know, PTSD is a strong word for it, but I certainly had war-related stress. And so I actually got some professional help, which was fantastic, and has equipped me with things to do and methods to use, which I did this time. And it's been completely different this time. And I cope much better. And I feel, I'm not saying it's going to last forever, but I will say that I feel better equipped to deal with. And I would say the same to anybody. If you have the opportunity to access professional help with people who know what they're talking about, then I would do that.
And over the course of your years in Ukraine, how have you seen the war change?
Well, it's become much more dangerous. I don't know what your perception is, but it is much, much more dangerous. And for instance, I always used to think of the front line and the cities as two very different places, where cities, the threat and the risk was lower. When you had incoming ballistics, it was as dangerous or possibly more dangerous than the front line. but you had long periods of relative safety. I would say that's changed a lot. And of course, places I used to go to are no longer there. Firstly, they've been occupied. And secondly, they've been completely destroyed. And thirdly, I would say that we're talking about a nation which every single person, civilian or military, has been traumatized. Yeah. And consequences of that are huge. And one of the things that I work on is to think about the future. That, I think, is another big change, is that organizations, companies, the world is no longer thinking purely in fire brigade terms about assisting with the war. They are actively thinking about the post-war situation and how that will look and what needs to be done. And that is a major change.
On the subject of trauma, I encountered there was an ex-post and a Ukrainian orchestra, the Harmonia Orchestra, managed to write and play the sound of a Geran or Shahid drone raid. And what I'll do for the audience, I'll insert it here. You don't need me to play it because you've heard these fucking things before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the sound of Shahids as played by the Harmonia Orchestra. And even sitting in my comfortable home in London, I hear that noise, it really puts me on edge. And that's the reality for everybody living in Ukraine. Yeah,
all the time. And last weekend, there was a firework display near where I was staying. I have to say that I was very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah. And the engine those things have is the later ones is some of them are jet engines now, but the original Shahids were designed with a moped engine. I can't order pizza.
Yeah. The hypervigilance, you've been there for, probably the longest I've been there is, 3 or 4 months. And it does begin to weigh you down, that level of hypervigilance. And you don't really lose it when you come back. You have quite a good sense of safety here, obviously, but the wrong noise, as you've just pointed out, and you're immediately switched back into that mode.
You said you couldn't not do something, but what are the values that drove you to think that?
I think there's a very clear line between right and wrong. There's a clear difference between democracy and autocracy and freedom. In 1991, 92% of Ukrainians voted yes to independence.
Yeah.
So how does that translate into a country that needs to be reabsorbed into Russia? There is no justification for that. And that's what I mean about clear right and wrong.
What do you say to those who say that the people in the east of Ukraine, they speak Russian, they're ethnically Russian, they want to be a part of Russia?
Look, there's always going to be a tiny minority of people, usually older or disaffected in some way, who look back to the Soviet era with these rose-tinted spectacles. What they remember is, a pension that came every week or whatever it was, and certainties. But what they don't remember is the black car that came at night and the living in fear. So if you juxtapose that with everybody I've met or spoken to who's either lived under occupation or has seen what the enemy, what the Russians have done, or spoken to their relatives about their experiences of being under Russian rule, the Ukrainians don't have a choice. It's either choose to be living without freedom, in fear, with torture routine, their children taken away, forced to fight against their brothers. That's not really a choice. You know, people say to me, oh, are they going to give up territory so that they can have peace? Would you want to live in the occupied territories? Everything I hear about them, it sounds like hell on earth. You know, I've been to places like that. I've been to Xinjiang, the northwesternmost region of China. And the CCP have turned that into an open prison.
Can you describe it?
There's an all-pervasive feeling of fear and terror. Nobody looks you in the eye. No one speaks to you. I was there many years ago. I remember what it used to be like. And I went back and I thought I'd arrived. It's the nearest place to hell I've ever been. It was just terrifying.
How so? I mean, how does that manifest itself?
It manifests in absolutely every area of life there. So they have what they call convenience police stations on every corner. They're Muslim. The Uyghur people are Muslim. They can't pray. They can't have beards. In many cases, the CCP station Chinese spies in their family homes to live with them for months at a time. There are cameras absolutely everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. Every single person's mobile phone is a listening device. They're monitored at all times. So the surveillance cameras monitor them through facial recognition. I was there on a motorcycle. I went to get petrol. When you arrive at a petrol station, you don't just go in and buy petrol. You arrive at a gate which is protected by dragon's teeth in emplacements, has a huge metal door and barbed wire. And you go up to a camera and you show your personal ID, and it looks at your face to see if your ID and your face match. And only then will it allow you in to go in and buy petrol.
Why?
Because every part of your life is managed and governed. I remember these people. They were proud, independent. They were warriors in the old days. They had a great sense of humor. They led full lives, families. They were religious. Now, if you go to the mosque more than a certain number of times, you will be arrested. They believe that up to 2 million people are in what are basically concentration camps and doing forced labor. Enforced sterilization. It's a genocide.
And yet, outside of dissident circles, there's so little reporting on that.
It's because no one is allowed in.
So how did you get in?
Well, we were on a motorcycle expedition and it took over a year to get our permissions to transit through that area. Of course, I'd been there before, so I remember what it was like. But traveling down the road, every couple of kilometers, there's a gantry with cameras on it, photographing every vehicle that goes by. And there are checkpoints so often where they do full body scans. They go through all your luggage. You have to queue for them to check your ID and your customs and everything else, once took us 8 hours to do 100 kilometers.
Are there more checkpoints than there are in Ukraine now?
Oh, it's everywhere, and going down the streets in the city, you know, there are lanes, there are police points, there are dragon's teeth, there's cameras. It's basically 1984. If you read 1984, that's Xinjiang today.
I want to turn back to Ukraine a little bit.
Yeah.
Before we move on to values. From your perspective on the ground, how important is international support? And how important is international volunteer support?
So one of the things that is very interesting about the Ukrainian war is the importance of civilian and volunteer humanitarian support. It's a huge percentage of the capability of the Ukrainian defense. You really cannot overemphasize how important it is. It's important because the procurement system, although it's being comprehensively reformed now, at the start of the war, it still suffered from the hangover from the old Soviet system. Procurement took a very long time. And there you are, you're a unit of a brigade on the front line. You desperately need, I don't know, a drone, maybe enough IFACs for each of your men. You know it's going to take 6 months for your request to be sent up the line to Kyiv, for it to be okayed, budgeted, and sent back down again. You haven't got 6 months. You're all going to be dead by then. So what do you do? So what the military has got very, very good at is appealing both to civilian support within the country, but also to any foreign volunteers that they are in communication with. And what they do is they say, we need this. And I'm not saying it's always supplied, but it often is. And there are also organizations like Come Back Alive Foundation, which have supplied unbelievable amounts of assistance to the military because the government both couldn't afford and didn't have the means to get this stuff to them quickly. So there's another element, which is the morale element. I've lost count, and I don't know if this happens to you when you go out to meet people. Every time I go and I meet soldiers and I bring them stuff or whatever it is, they say to me how important it is to know that they haven't been forgotten.
One time strikes me, we met 34th Marines near Mykolaiv. They operate in Kherson direction, but we couldn't get permissions to get into Kherson, and it was too hot at the time. And we were met by one of their commanders, who's a Hasidic Jewish fellow called Asher.
Right.
And he has the Ukrainian tritium on his yarmulke. And his huge, big, white, snowy beard looks like Gandalf in camo.
Yeah, okay.
He was so... It's amazing how he was so cheerful, and all we did was hand over like two pickup trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And they always come, so often they come bearing gifts. They want to give the volunteers flags and patches, and you know, he was there. He spoke briefly with an American volunteer who has a bit of scratch behind him. And he said, "Oh, what we need is a lathe." And the American was like, "Yeah, okay, it's yours." And he's like, "You are like Father Christmas." And it was such a moment, and everybody sort of came away from that situation, from that meeting, feeling slightly risen. It's, to me, the way I see it, this war is the first war that I've seen to be crowdfunded in such a significant way. I've never seen that before. I don't think history has really seen that. Oh, no. I mean, if you go back to World War II, buy war bonds and that sort of thing. But the way it's organized just by people like yourself, who just give up their time, give up their money and put themselves at risk because of a matter of principle. And onto those principles, we touched on it before. When I say the words freedom, democracy, they often mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. What do they mean to you? What images do they conjure in your mind?
Well, I think freedom and democracy mean having choices. I'm allowed to choose to make my own decisions and live by them. And there's a moment where paternalism, benevolent paternalism, turns into autocracy and dictatorship. And I recognise that's a difficult line to tread. But I would rather have the freedom to make my own mistakes than have someone stop me doing that. And I don't see in countries I've visited under dictators like China or Turkmenistan, also another horrible, horrible place. People are not happy. You know, I talk to young people here and they're always telling me that we live, you know, in a kind of fascist state. And I feel like saying to them, you have no idea. You have no idea.
I didn't know you'd been to Turkmenistan. I desperately want to ask, I mean, what's that experience like? What's the place like? You're the first person I've ever spoken to actually set foot in the country. Most people would forget it exists, but for a reminder of the audience, this country is absolutely insane. The previous ruler, put it this way, I don't know if any of my wonderful listeners have seen Sacha Baron Cohen's The Dictator. But his character in that is very much based on the previous ruler of Turkmenistan. I forget his name.
Gurbanguly Muhamedov.
Were you there when he was in charge?
No, his successor, I think, was an ex-dentist. But he allegedly, Gurbanguly, boiled his opponents alive.
Bloody hell, that's dark. That's horrific. I mean, people see this man as a bit of a comic figure, changing the names of things like bread, banning dogs, banning some sort of various types of dancing. But people forget that the darkness that lays behind these kind of individuals. Touch on sort of young people and they're losing faith with democracy. This is something I ask all of my interviewees because it's really important. I've reached an age now where I'm like, there's something wrong with those young people. And they seem to be turning to more and more political extremes. And you see there's polling that was carried out by YouGov early in the year. I think democracy, the idea, has support about 50% in France and Spain, 48% in Poland. Not great numbers. What would you say to young people who are losing faith in the idea of democracy?
Democracy is flawed. Of course it is. But it's the best we've got at the moment. And why not work to improve it rather than just throw everything away? I would ask them what would they like instead, because they tend to come back with kind of woolly phrases, but no practical solutions. What you need is actual practical solutions. If you are interested in improving or changing or finding a better political system, how about learning about politics and governance and administration and all of those things and studying it? And then, I'm not suggesting that we can't improve on democracy. make democracy better or make it work better. I'm not suggesting we can't do that, but I think that espousing the alternatives shouldn't be the alternative. Why is fascism or communism better than democracy? I've never met a country where that's being practiced that is better than democracy. I think the proof is in when it's applied to a country, to a group of people. Does it work?
I mean, people would say it seems to work in China, but you've spoken at length in this interview of the actual experience once you leave cities like Beijing.
It's not democracy.
No.
Democracy and freedom go hand in hand. There is no freedom in China.
No. But people would say that economically it works, that it seems to provide a future for its citizens. What would you say to those people?
Well, I'm not an economist, and please don't challenge me on figures, but I think everybody realizes what's happening to the economy of China. It's on the brink of collapse. So, yeah, no, it doesn't work economically. There are certain people who are very rich, but almost everything in China depends on who you know and who your father and mother are.
Yeah, it's another argument I get put to me is that, well, democracy is corrupt and authoritarian states are not, but they absolutely are, just in different manners.
It's absolutely, that's why it's so terrifying, and all the well-known method of getting rid of dangerous opponents is to accuse them of corruption. It's been extensively used in China. Putin uses it in Russia. And then, of course, the people who are accused of it get very upset by what they've done and spontaneously jump out of a window.
So the many defenestrations of Russia, yeah.
Staggering
numbers. Before we close out, if you have if somebody happens to be listening, if they want to either volunteer in Ukraine or assist in some way, what is your advice? My advice is to find an organization that you like the sound of and volunteer to help. And I would always say to people who have ambitions to work near the front line, I would always say to them, you've got to earn your spurs. That means going and doing menial and not particularly nice tasks somewhere like Kharkiv or one of the cities, looking after refugees or cooking for people or whatever it is. And if you can do that, then you can be useful. Because what you need to do, if you really want to help, is be useful. The last thing you want to do is become somebody who has to be looked after. Absolutely. And my final question, this often gets a varying number of responses, from the short and sharp to the slightly philosophical. Do you have a message for the authoritarians of the world and those people that support them? My immediate thought is I could answer that as though I was answering to your audience. Or am I actually speaking to the dictators themselves? Directly to them. If I'm speaking directly to them, I would say, what are you afraid of? What do you mean by that? I mean that behavior like theirs always stems from fear. If they were no longer afraid, would they need to carry on doing what they're doing? Well, that's a very good question. Rosie, thank you very much. And thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a very fascinating and thoughtful discussion. Theo, thank you for asking me. It's always a joy to talk to you, and amazing what you do, really. Pales in comparison, I would say. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Why We Fight. Thank you very much for listening, and always remember that democracy is non-negotiable. That's it for this episode of Why We Fight. What struck you most about their story? What did you agree or disagree with? Drop a comment and let us know. And if this conversation meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who cares about democracy as much as you do. To get early access and support independent journalism, join us on Patreon or Substack. Links are in the description. And if you want to connect with a global community of people who care about freedom and human rights, come hang out with us on Discord. Until next time, remember, democracy is non-negotiable.